Hello and welcome to the Black Hand Communique. I am Ryan O'Dowd. Today's episode is going to be about what I call the modern day version of COINTELPRO. What is COINTELPRO, you ask? Or, I already know what COINTELPRO is, you say. Hey, second guy, you sit there and have patience. First guy, I'm going to answer your question. COINTELPRO was the government program run by the CIA during the 1960s, whose job was basically to infiltrate, spread lies, destroy the reputation of, and otherwise disrupt political dissident groups. As we all know, during the 1960s, there was a heyday in American activism, especially in regards to the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam movement, the burgeoning feminist movement, and the burgeoning gay rights movement. They all started, well, they all finished in the 60s, you might say. And at that time, the government considered civil rights leaders like Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, Huey Newton, to be great threats to American sovereignty and security because they were forming a wedge between black people and white people. How dare they? Of course, the wedge was actually formed by the illegal laws that were made that were suppressing black people across the United States in the first place, because people in organizations like the Students for a Democratic Society were infiltrated. That's not why it happened, but they were infiltrated because the FBI and the CIA thought that these people were dangerous radicals, because they wanted things like the ability for black people to choose their own seat on a bus, or to eat a sandwich without getting kicked out of a restaurant for not being white. Now, at the time in merry old America, when people like to look back and say, oh, it was so great back. No, it wasn't that great back in the day. Now, at that time in merry old America, if you rocked the boat, you were basically labeled a communist, and communism was considered the greatest threat to American security, at least publicly, that the people who ran the government talked about. So people like Stokely Carmichael and Huey Newton, who openly talked about reading the works of Marx, gasp, how dare you read a book by someone that's not quite in line with the way that the dominant paradigm works. Because these people did things like reading and talking about the needs of their people, they got spied upon. But it's more than just spying. COINTELPRO's job was to discredit them by any means necessary. So they would infiltrate organizations like the Black Panthers, like the Students for a Democratic Society, like the Nation of Islam, or the anti-Vietnam movement, the Weathermen, the White Panthers, any organization who had a subversive quality, and they would go into these organizations as agents, and they would either be unit provocateurs, who basically their job was to get people in these organizations to act violent in a way that is very stupid and doesn't have a lot of wisdom to it, so that everyone can get rounded up and arrested. Or they would spy on Martin Luther King Jr., find out that he sleeps around on women. Okay, he really did that. But they would use it to discredit him so that he didn't gain as much in the civil rights sphere. And of course, when Martin Luther King Jr. started talking about the rights of poor people, that's what happened to him. Malcolm X, they killed a long time, 3 years before they killed Martin Luther King Jr., because Malcolm X was straight up for self-determination of black people, and they couldn't spin that in a way that they liked, so they just made sure that he was fucking murdered. Now, the COINTELPRO organization officially ended in the 70s, around the time of the end of the Vietnam War and the end of Nixon. For some reason, when Nixon spied upon the Democratic Party, suddenly shit got real, and once the two-party system, which of course keeps the entire system afloat for them, the lawless controllers, once the two-party system looked threatened, then they backed off officially. Well, guess what? It's a new day and a new dawn, and the sun rises again for organizations in the security state. And now we have the NSA. We had the NSA then, but it was a different organization. And we have the Department of Homeland Security, which of course was invented when I was a teenager, or at least it was made when I was a teenager. Now, these organizations, the NSA specifically, it has been revealed by Edward Snowden, have a commitment to a project called JTRIG, J-T-R-I-G, which stands for the Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group. And its job is basically to be COINTELPRO 2014 online. According to documents released by Edward Snowden, that the NSA wrote themselves, it's in the NSA's, it's their hand that made it, that they are online spying and infiltrating political organizations for American dissidents and political dissenters so that they could discredit people and smear them and control their actions to reach an end that they desire. They being the law's controllers, they being the NSA and the DHS. Now, you might say to yourself, I'm just an ordinary guy or gal or transsexual, and I don't think that this is going to affect me. Well, you should know, and I will provide all the links in the About section so you could do your own investigating. You should know that this is not limited to violent extremists. Peace activists, in other words, if you're against war, gun rights activists, if you believe that the Second Amendment means that people have the right to arm themselves, union leaders, if you think that workers should be able to organize and in order to jointly and collectively bargain, people who believe in homeschooling, if you think people have the right to teach their own kids things, people who believe in liberty, these are specific targets that the NSA and the DHS has named that they're looking at. Oh, these horrible people who are against war, or think that the Constitution matters, or don't want to be in a unionless society where the government decides all wages, or even worse, corporations decide wages and the government just enforces what the corporations want. Homeschoolers, people that want to not publicly school their kid. Why wouldn't you want to publicly school your kid? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because public schools are terrible? Maybe because public schools make you pledge to a fucking flag every single day of your life in an obviously Orwellian fucking ritual that makes you feel with a whoosh button and fuck USA Uber Alice and all that shit? Why would? Because people want to teach their own kids. They want to be responsible for them. And that's on every part of the political spectrum that people believe in these things. And nonetheless, these are the sorts of people that JTRIG, run by the NSA, are targeting. And what are they doing with these people that they target? They're doing old COINTELPRO tactics. They're doing divide and conquer. They're trying to find ways that me and you disagree ideologically and then turn us against each other so that we fight and bicker when we're both victims of their system, the lawless controllers, the handful of people at the top who sit on the Fortune 500 companies, who are lobbying the government and also belong to the government. I'm not going to go into the names of these people, but we could do our own research, can't we? Now, you might say, okay, that's all well and good, Ryan. It still sounds paranoid and crazy. And like I said, I'm going to include the links. You do your own research. I'm not here to program you. I'm trying to raise your awareness. That's all well and good, but I'm not any of those things. I don't belong to the NRA. I don't belong to the Students for Democratic Society. I don't belong to a union. I don't belong to a homeschool. I don't belong to any formal peace organization whatsoever. Well, guess what? Have you ever written anything about any government organization whatsoever? Because, and I will provide the link, the Department of Homeland Security. Now, remember we were talking about the DHS NSA project out in Utah to basically record everything that's on the entire internet and provide algorithms so that people's behavior can be anticipated and geared towards the mission of the lawless elite. Okay? Well, guess what? Anyone who writes the words the Red Cross, DHS, CIA, FBI, TSA, and a handful of other jumbled up fucking acronyms the government likes to use, simply spelling those words and putting them on Facebook gets you flagged by the DHS, and they will then examine you. And you might get off of it, oh, they're just an ordinary schmuck. Nonetheless, you're getting flagged, even if you're not a political dissident. And when I say political dissident, I don't mean that you're blowing people up or shooting people, right? Are we for that? What I'm talking about is just speaking, engaging in your First Amendment rights. America's supposed to be about challenging the authority of the government. That's what it's, and challenging all authority. Corporations, religious authorities, international authorities, economic authorities, the academic institutions in our society. We are supposed to be challenging all of them. There is not supposed to be authority in the United States that goes unchallenged. That was the point of the United States. Thomas Jefferson only signed the fucking Constitution in the first place because he insisted that the Bill of Rights get in there. And now Thomas Jefferson was a hypocritical old white asshole who owned slaves, but nonetheless he had a few good ideas. And they're in the Bill of Rights, mostly. Call me crazy because I believe in that. I believe in the right to free speech. I believe in the right for people to arm themselves and ultimately defend themselves against the government if the government becomes tyrannical. I believe in the right for a jury of our peers. And we don't even have a jury of our peers anymore. The juries are selected by the government and selected by the fucking lawyers that have the trial. They're not a jury of our peers anyway, but that's the problem, is all of our constitutional rights are getting eroded from the inside out. Back to the topic at hand, JTRIG. Now, as you could probably figure out by now, JTRIG basically is COINTELPRO 2014 with computers. And let me describe some of the methods that they'll use in order to discredit people. And you will think, and you will see, that this is something that people do that you will recognize online happening to you and to other people that you care about. For one thing, they will, if there's a discussion happening that's being productive, where people of different ideologies are realizing that they have things in common, they'll throw a troll in there just to be an asshole and just disrupt the entire thing. Like, just confusion is a method that they use. Like, if you're building an alliance with someone you normally wouldn't, then the confusion is something that will happen. Straight up untruth. If someone is presenting factual information that just isn't factual, and they have no way to back it up, and they disrupt the conversation in that way. Anyone that uses just, terms for people on different sides and different political viewpoints that are just degrading and demoralizing and don't help the discussion at all, they can be a JTRIG. They can also just be an asshole. That's the thing. Any of this can be troll behavior, but JTRIG does this shit on purpose as well. Trying to steer a movement or a group of people in a way that helps them with what they're trying to accomplish. If they can't fight you, then they'll co-opt you. That's what they're calling. Trying to get guns rights activists to become, law and order people, quote unquote, that are, for police shooting people. Trying to co-opt environmentalists to make them for an international tax cap and trade program, which would give the elite even more power over the economy and over individuals. Trying to steer resource-based economics people into the kind of transhumanism that the elite feels will cement their control in the future by giving them the control over the technique. Trying to get libertarians to say things that are so provocative that it inflames or can easily be misconstrued by people so that their political opponents can be brought back into the state. All of these are methods that are used, okay? So, main thing I wanted to tell you today is that this is happening, JTRIG is happening, it's the new COINTELPRO. And the message I really want you to get is that we should be working together and we shouldn't be working apart. I'm very excited about Ralph Nader working with libertarians, the Greens and the Libertarian Alliance that's happening, because we really do have more in common than we have away from each other. And we're all the victims of this society. We're not the part of the lawless elite. And the lawless elite will do anything they can to turn us against one another so that we don't fight them. And they're the enemy. Okay? So I'm Ryan O'Dowd. Let's stick together as radicals on this shit. And fuck the goddamn machine. It's Black Hand Communique.